Hi guys, today we're going to be working on securing the Linux operating system, and in this situation we're using Ubuntu, but the security settings here are going to for the most part be the same across the board. And to do this we're going to need our attack plan, and we're going to need some knowledge of the terminal command line interface. If you aren't comfortable with terminal, what I do recommend is taking a look at my Linux tutorial that goes over some of the basic ways to maneuver and manipulate around in terminal, because you're going to understand why it's so much more powerful than a graphical interface. And again, this attack plan that I've created here is a general attack plan. This isn't specified for any specific industry. So what you would need to do is you would have to make sure that if you are going to be working at an organization, or if you're going to be making your up an organization, that you change the specifications as needed for that company. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is log in as Chuck Bartowski. He is our main user here, and the password is, as usual, password. All right, so once we're in the system, we're going to go through and follow the plan as dictated before. So we're going to go with user accounts first. And the good thing about the user accounts is, for the most part, the basic settings for user accounts can be done from within the user accounts in the graphical interface. Now, to know what we need to do, let's take a look at our instructions. It says that only Chuck, Sarah, Casey, and Morgan are allowed to be administrators. The authorized users are as follows, and all other users are to be isolated. And this is really important. Again, and I keep reiterating this, you want to be whenever you're in a work environment, if you end up deleting the user, you really can't do forensics to find out how that user got there to begin with. The only group allowed is Team Bartowski. No remote access services are allowed, and then secure the system using your expertise on anything not specified. So let's go with the first one here, which is user accounts. And this does make it pretty simple to do. And what you want to do here is you want to go and unlock to make changes. Okay, so you add your password, and this will unlock it, so you'll be able to make the changes that you need to. Now, you'll see here that you have the administrator type and the language, all this stuff, password. It keeps a login history and all that information as well. Now, the other thing that you want to do is you want to change once you're an administrator in Linux, you want to change the type of users for all of these. So, for example, Sarah is a standard user, but she needs to be an administrator. Beckman is standard, and that's fine. Director. Now, director doesn't show up in this list at all. What we need to do is we need to isolate and disable this account. And so what you do is you go into the login right here, and you want to make sure if this account is enabled. For example, here the account is enabled. You want to go through and disable this account. Now, to enable an account, you usually have to put in some kind of password, and that will enable it if it's already disabled. So let's just put password 123. It's not good enough. Okay, so let's make a more complicated password for the purposes here. Now this account is enabled, but again, this guy's still not allowed to be on the system. So to disable him, what you do is just click disable this account, hit change, and now the account is disabled. There's a lot of disabled accounts on here that need to be made into active accounts. So what you'll do is you'll go through one after another, and you'll make all of these accounts and give them the right permissions. Okay, so that's the first part of the user accounts, is getting everyone in their right area. So you're going to change their password, change their account type, disable any unauthorized users. Now, in this situation, disabling a guest login. So for example, if I go and log out here, I can log in as a guest user. And guest users can be exploited by the system for the purposes of hacking in. So we want to get rid of this guest session here, okay? And I'll give you guys a quick example of this. So this machine is not secured, which means that there might have been a hacker already on the system, or someone just really didn't know what they were doing, okay? And what I'm going to do, and it says that all data created during the guest session will not be kept. So I'm going to go into terminal. And if you guys remember from the the previous tutorial on Linux, there's a really important file on here called shadow. So if I go to CD and etc, which is where the configuration files are, wait a minute, I have access to this. How is that possible, right? So now I'm going into here, and I can take a look at the shadow file to see some of the passwords, right? So let's go ahead and get into this shadow file. So we'll do sudo cat or we'll just do cat shadow. Permission denied. Now there's a command that elevates me to an administrator, which is the sudo command. So this says I'm going to run this as an administrator. So sudo cat shadow. And in this situation, the operation is not permitted. So that's good. That's exactly how you want it. But really, a guest user shouldn't even be able to get into this stuff. So let's take a look if I can view some of the other stuff. Well, for example, let's say I want to access an account. So if I go to let's take a look to see if I can see some of the groups. Nope, operations not permitted. So this is the fact that I can get into here is not good, but at the same time there are some basic settings that are preventing me from doing some of the things that I can do. I wonder if I can install a program here. So let's do sudo apt install John. All right, and no, so I can't do that. So that's good. So we're gonna log back out and we're gonna go back into the Chuck Bartowski account. And here we're just going to put in the password again. And what we're going to do now is we're going to disable that guest login so that it can't be exploited. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into terminal and we want to go back into the etc folder. And there's a specific folder that we're looking for. That folder is called the lightdm folder. Okay, so we're going to cd into lightdm and we want to go into this folder here. So again, cd lightdm, just use tab to autocomplete. And there's no files in here, however, we need to make one. Now this is where it gets a little complicated. If I do sudo cat and I make a new file called 50 no guest.config, right? If I try to make this, it's going to give me a permission denied. But if I do sudo su, which means switch user, I can switch user to root. And once I do that, if I put in my password, now I don't have any restrictions. Root is the highest level that you can be on a system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same command now, except now I don't have to write sudo anymore. So I'll do cat, and then I'm going to do 50 no guest.config. Now, once I add this, and again, Control D to get rid of that, we're going to edit this file. So we'll go nano, and we're going to nano, and then 50 tab to autocomplete. So once we're here, we're going to add some information into here. So you use a bracket, and then put seat defaults. Okay, and then you're going to add allow guest equals false. All right. Control X to get rid of it, get out of here, hit Y to save the changes, and then the enter to write it to that same file. Now what we're going to do is we're going to reset the system to make any changes that we have applied. And let's just give this a second to load back up. All right, we're back in, and now if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, that guest session is now gone, so you can't log in as a guest user anymore. All right, so that part is done. All right, so now that we've disabled the guest account, in this situation, we can't rename admin. For Linux, root is always going to be root. What we can do is just make it so that no one really has access to root except for the authorized users, and that we put in the strong permissions in there. So what we've done now is we've changed a couple of passwords, changed some account types. I showed you guys how to disable the unauthorized users. We've disabled guests, and the rename admin can't happen. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to enable the firewall on Linux. Now, if you go into settings, you're going to notice that there's nothing in here about firewall security or any of that kind of information. Even under network, where you might think it would be, it's not there. So what we're going to do is, again, open up terminal, because everything's going to happen through terminal. Now, with Linux, they have this firewall called UFW, or uncomplicated firewall. So what you do is, in this situation, we want to take a look to see what the status of our firewall is. So we're going to do sudo UFW and then status. Okay, so once we put in our password, we're going to see that the status is inactive. So what we're going to do now is we're going to enable our firewall. So sudo ufw enable. Once we do that and then we do the status again, now we're going to see that the status is active and there's a couple of rules that are in here. Now, if you want to find out more about UFW, you could do UFW help. All right, and this will give you a couple of basic commands. Let me make this window a little bit bigger. This will give you a couple of basic commands that you can do in here. So there's the enable and disable the firewall. There's the different types of rules and all that stuff. So what we want to find out is the more detailed information about this firewall. So we're going to get a verbose status. So it's sudo ufw status verbose. And you'll see that this is what we want, and this is what the command is right there. So once we put that, we see that it's deny all incoming, which is good, allow all outgoing, which is fine, and then you have the disabled. Unless your company says, you know what, you want to do a very restrictive firewall, so you want to not do any outgoing, you want it to all be denied, you can do it that way as well. The way you do that is, this is your default policy. So you do sudo ufw default deny outgoing. And when you do this, now my default policy has changed, and if I do the verbose status again, you'll see that the outgoing is by default denied. Now, the only ones that will be allowed in this situation are any rules that we specifically allow. So we have these rules that are allowed in from anywhere. Okay, so what we're going to do now is let's change that deny back to allow. So sudo ufw allow, default allow outgoing. All right, and we're going to go through, and remember the instruction said no remote access whatsoever. So we have 22 and 23. These are remote access ports. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove those, okay? And the way that you remove the rules in here is you're going to, there's two ways to do it. You can delete the rule altogether, or you could just deny these two ports because you don't want to allow them anyways. So what we're going to do here is sudo ufw deny, and then you can do either the service, which is SSH on 22 and telnet on 23, or you could just type in the port. So deny 22, and then sudo ufw deny 23. Okay, now if we do the verbose again, you'll see that it's showing a deny in here, but we do have some conflicting rules because it is allowing in from anywhere on port 23. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the numbered statuses to delete some of those conflicting rules, and we can do that with sudo ufw status numbered. All right, and then we're going to see that rule number 2 is allowed, and we want to get rid of that rule. Okay, so the way that we do that is we're going to use the delete, and then we're just going to do sudo ufw delete, and then the rule number, which is 2. And then it's going to say, do you want to delete allowing that? Say yes. And then if you do sudo ufw status verbose, now you'll see that that rule is gone. Now there's also this rule right here, which is the version 6. Let's go through and delete that one as well. So that one was right here, rule number 10. So we do sudo ufw delete number 10. And then same thing, yes, and we'll go through. Now, what you want to do is you'll notice that there's a couple of ports here that you don't know if you want to keep or not. And this is really important to figure out which ports are good and which ports are bad. So Google is your friend. It's one of the best tools that we have as IT professionals to figure out when we can't answer it ourselves. So we're going to go through and look at some of these ones right here. So you have 31337. So type in port 31337, and you'll notice on here that there is a Cybersecurity Awareness Month, day 5. It's port, backdoors, malwares, Trojan, oh my. So most likely we're going to delete this rule. Okay, so you're going to go in and not only delete it, but then you want to specifically deny it, right? So you do sudo ufw status numbered. And then we're going to delete rule number 12. We're going to delete. And here's the problem. Once you delete the rule, the numbers change. So you're going to need to do the numbered ones again, especially lower in the list here. So then we're going to delete number, let's see, 12 again. And we're going to delete numbers 6 and 5. All right, and then we'll do sudo ufw status verbose. Now, these other ports that are on here, some of these ports are, oh, this thing is still here. Some of these ports are malicious. They can be exploited. You have your SMTP port here and a couple of others that are going on, and you want to make sure that you figure out from your organization what their rules are. And typically what I would recommend in this situation is if you have this system that was set up by someone who really doesn't know what they're doing, it's a good policy to just delete all the rules and then start from scratch and then just add the rules that you want. Now, if you do want to do a graphical version of this, there is a program you can install called GUFW, which is Graphical Uncomplicated Firewall. And you do sudo apt install GUFW. All right, and so this will be the graphical version of it. So for people that do want to use graphical, it is an option. However, my personal preference is to go directly through what's available in terminal. So I'll let this install in the background and we'll take a look here. So we turned on the firewall here. The notifications are, we'll go through that in the graphical version of it. We've configured some rules. And we've allowed some applications and programs through the firewall, so we disable things like remote access. Now, when it comes to programs and features in Ubuntu, it's a little complicated, and the reason is because you have some programs that never run in a graphical format. So if I install a program like John, which is John the Ripper, the password cracking program, and once this is fully installed on my system, if I go into my software library, that's not going to pop up as one of the installed programs. So this is a slight problem that you might have from time to time. There is ways to take a look at exactly what's installed on your system, and what you want to do in those situations is there's a place where all this information is stored, and you really need to go one at a time. Typically though, when you're working in an enterprise environment, you're just doing a clean machine and setting it up with good policies. So I'm not going to complicate that. I'm not going to explain that. It is complicated. So if you do want to go through that, there is Google searches that you could type commands into terminal and see all of the programs that are installed on your system. All right. So now that GUFW is installed, we're going to launch it by typing sudo GUFW. And by doing this, we have the whole graphical interface here. You want to take a look at logs on this side right here, and this will this is where logs are kept, and you can edit your profiles, all this stuff in here. So you'll take a look, you'll see all the different rules here. It is pretty easy to delete the rules in this situation. I can just click minus on the rule and it will delete all the rules that are in the system. So this does make it a little bit easier to remove rules than it is in the terminal version. However, my personal preference is when you're adding a rule, it's a lot easier to add the rule. So for example, once we're done here, I'll add a rule for you guys. So if we go and add a rule, you're going to notice that it gets pretty complicated here. So there's the simple version of it, there's the advanced version of it. So typically I don't do any of that. So this is the report here, and it shows all of the different things that we've done, the ports, the addresses, all that stuff, and these are all the rules that were deleted. And the logging is automatically done here where we did a forced delete. So the logging is automatically set up in this one. All right. The next process we're going to cover is going to be programs, features, and tasks. Again, some programs you won't be able to see. However, we can through here take a look at the installed programs. So for example, if your company says no video games or anything like that, you can hit remove on all of these different programs. If there's different software that you want to do, you can go through and remove it from here. The other way is if you know for sure that there's an application that's installed. I believe it's sudo apt remove, and we can remove John. So this removes John the Ripper from our system. And so now if I try to do sudo John, that command is not found. So you can also go through command line interface and remove the applications this way instead of having to search through the software library. This is primarily used in the situation where you know exactly what the software is called. The next part here is going to be to change file permissions. Now, file permissions, if you remember, we covered that in the Linux tutorial. You can, for example, if I do an ls here on my desktop, so if I do an ls command on my desktop, I have the instructions here. And if I do ls-la, this shows me all of the different commands that I can do. And maybe I don't want people that are not part of my user group to be able to see the contents of this file. And if I want to prevent that, remember the command is chmod the group or the type of file, the person that's on this. So you have your user, your group, and your other, and I want to remove the read permissions from the other users and for the file of instructions. And now if I do ls-la, you'll notice that other users, if they get access to my folder, can't read these files. And this is how you change the different types of file permissions. An important place to do that is in your etc folder. So if you do ls-la, you're going to see a couple of things here. Now, there's certain things that you don't need to change. For example, you have your root user and the root group, and you typically don't need to go through and change that. But if you notice that some of these people can execute certain things, and you just want to make sure that important files are not kept. Now, some of the important files, for example, are going to be your shadow file. And on this one, the only person who can read it is the root user. You also have another important file, which is groups. This shows the groups that are on here. And other users can read groups on the system. But if you want to get rid of that, again, we're going to do, in this situation, you want to elevate yourself to a sudo user. Sudo chmod from other, remove the read options on group. All right, and then if we do ls-la again, you're going to see that other users that are on this system will not be able to see the group file. Okay, so that's how you change the file permissions. It's a lot easier on here, in my opinion, than it is on Windows. I do prefer that. The last thing is the updates. Now, the way that you update the system is you can go through your graphical interface and then go to software and updates, and then you can do the Ubuntu updates, or the other way you can do it is through terminal, is you do a sudo apt update. And so this will go through and update all of your applications. There's also upgrade, so you can upgrade your applications, and it's going to go through and do a lot of the upgrades. And then there's a list of upgradable stuff, so it'll tell you if all the packages have, like for example here it says 81 packages can be upgraded. So instead of update, I'm going to use upgrade. And so this is going to do a lot of other upgrades. So for now, I'm not going to do that right now. All right. That's how you do the updates for Ubuntu. Now, the next thing that's on here is going to be the policies. This is where it gets kind of fun. So policies, we're going to go through a couple of different folders. The first one is going to be your PAMD. Okay. So if we do an ls here, you'll notice that there's a folder on here called PAM. And PAM is what stores all of your configuration models. So you have it right here, PAMD. Okay, so we're going to cd into PAMD. And then once you're in here, there's a couple of things that we want to look at. The first one that we're going to look at is your common password. What this is going to do is it's going to change the way that we set password policies on the Windows system. We're going to set the password policies on here. So what we'll do is sudo, and we're going to add policies. So we have to nano it because we're going to write to this, and then we're going to do common password and go into here. So when we're doing this, there's a couple of places that we're going to look. The first place that we're going to look is the line that ends in right here that starts with pamunix.so. All right, so we're going to go, and again, anything that you see with a pound sign, that is a comment, so it's ignored by the system. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to change some information in here. So we're going to add remember equals 5. So this remembers the last 5 passwords. And then min_len equals 8. So this gives a minimum length of 8. All right. The next thing is going to be in the crack.library. So that one is, let's take a look here. I don't see that one in here, so I don't think it's been added. So what we can do in this situation, because again, it just ignores the blank space anyways, we're just going to add to the end of this, we're going to add the information here. This is to make your passwords complicated. Now by default, you know, I have to do a little bit more research on this. I apologize for not having this ready, but Linux does make sure that passwords are complicated enough when you try to add them. So if you try to use a common password like password, it won't allow it. So we'll just add this on here that requires you to do a complicated password. But again, I don't know if this is the most current way of doing this anymore. All right, so just what I'm typing in here is what you need. All right, so we're gonna hit Control X to save your files and then to the common password. The next one that we're going to do is going to be our common authorization folder. So you're gonna do sudo nano and then common auth. All right. And here you're going to have at the very bottom of your file, okay, so go all the way down. And at the very end of the file, before this comment, all right, we're going to add this. We are going to add auth required ham_tally 2.so deny equals 5 on error equals fail, which means that on the error, so what we're saying is deny after 5 failed errors, unlock_time equals 1800, which is 30 minutes. All right, so once that's done, we just save these changes to the common auth file. And now the last thing that we're going to do is go into the login. There's again in the etc folder, so I changed directories up one with the cd double dot, and then we're going to go in the etc folder and we're looking for login.defs, which is this file here, and we're going to sudo nano login.defs. And here what we're looking for is a specific let me use the page down. We're looking for a specific value, and that's going to be right here. So what this is your maximum password storage days. We're going to change that from the 999, which is an unlimited storage, to 90. We're going to change this to 10. All right. And we're going to change this to 7. So this will, the 7 right here will say that before 7 days before your password expires, you'll get a warning. You can change your password after 10 days. And then you can only keep your password for a total of 90 days. We're going to save this. And the final thing that we're going to do is install a program called audit-d, and this will allow us to audit our system. So sudo apt install audit-d. All right, and then once this is installed, we're going to configure the file. We're going to enable the file. So audit ctl-e1 sudo audit. All right, so now this is adding some auditing systems in here, and if we do an ls command, you'll see that there's going to be now an audit file. Let's take a look. Forget exactly where it is, right here. So this audit, so we're going to cd audit and you might need to do sudo su to get to get into this one. And you have your audit rules and your audit config file here. And if we do a cat on audit d.config, you'll see that there's a bunch of different rules on here. You can change these rules if necessary, but this is your standard logging system for Ubuntu. So the last thing that I want to cover today is the different groups that are on a system, and specifically why terminal is more powerful than the graphical interface. I'm going to show you guys a couple of workarounds that you can do for users that are not given administrator privileges. If you take a look at the group folder, so we can do sudo cat groups. Sudo cat group, you're going to see that there's Team Bartowski, there's the Ring, there's Fulcrum, there's Buymore, and the only team that's allowed, the only group that's allowed is Team Bartowski. Well, we want to see what kind of permissions these have, and you can do that in the sudoers file. So we're going to go to sudo cat sudoers. And this will tell us, hey, there's a couple of members of this group that have admin and may gain root privileges. So this is really a concern, because if we take a look at a user like the director, so what we're going to do is we're going to do sudo su director. All right. Now we are logged in as the director on Ubuntu, right? And we can do a sudo command. So for example, if I want to do sudo cat group and I enter in the director's password, which I know is the right password. Okay, I must have messed up the director's password here, but this person hang on. All right, I'm gonna have to close out of this. Something got messed up with this file, but since the director is in the sudoers group, then that's a really big problem, because you can be a standard user and have administrative privileges if you're part of a group that has administrative privileges. So the way that we edit that file is visudo, and you do have to sudo this. So sudo visudo and put in the password for Chuck. And what you want to do is you want to delete anyone from this list. And so let's take a look at a couple things that are in here. So what this says is that all of these users have root privileges. They have the privileges of an administrator. And the only ones that are really allowed are Chuck, Casey, Sarah, and Morgan. So what we're going to do in this situation is we're going to remove everyone from the administrator privileges. So even if someone is a standard user according to the system, if they're in this folder, they have root privileges. So we're going to go through and just delete one after another. And then we're going to delete the permissions of the group as well. So having those groups there is not the best thing, but at the same time, if we get rid of their permissions to be able to do administrator commands, then we can still do forensics on it to figure out how that group got there. So we're going to go ahead and remove all of these. And now your groups that are allowed are your administrator group and your Team Bartowski group. And every member that's of the sudo group is allowed to do this. So we're going to hit Control X to save this file in the sudoers file, and we are done. All right. So this is your basic Ubuntu security systems. There's obviously so much more that you can learn when it comes to Linux. There are certification courses that they offer specifically on Linux, because there's so many different things that Linux is used for. I think it's something like 70% of the web servers in the world are running on Linux, just because of the stability and the fact that there's no memory leaks. So please don't stop learning about Linux here. What I would recommend is buying a really cheap computer, a laptop or something, and loading Linux on there to get comfortable with it. They require no more than 25 gigabytes of storage and no more than 2 gigabytes of RAM to run Ubuntu. So you can buy a cheap, like $300 laptop or even a used laptop, and this system runs really well. There's a lot of tutorials out there on creating a bootable Linux. and as well as creating like installing it on your direct drive. So there's a lot of different things that you guys can do with Linux, and I highly recommend this, especially if you're going to be looking into penetration testing. And if you don't want to do all that but you want to get more comfortable with Linux, you can always just make a virtual machine and just run it this way. Well, I hope you guys learned a lot from this tutorial, and this is the last one that I'm going to be doing for now. However, I do plan, as I learn more myself and as the needs of people are growing, I do plan on adding more to this website. And especially if there's any specific requests that you guys have, please mention it in my comments section, and I'll be happy to work and get that for you guys as soon as I can. Have a great day, guys.